In a small, quiet town, there lived a young couple named John and Alinena. Their home was small, but it was filled with love, hope, and dreams for a better future. John worked very hard, but life had never been easy for them. The money he earned was barely enough to cover their daily needs. Still, Alinena never complained. She always believed that patience and hard work would someday change their lives. Every morning, she would wake up before sunrise. She prepared breakfast, cleaned the house, and packed John's lunch before he left for work. When John walked out of the door, she always smiled and said softly, "Don't worry about us, just work hard. Everything will be fine." But deep inside, she knew that things were getting harder day by day. One evening, John came home looking very worried. His face was pale, and his eyes showed the weight of a difficult decision. Alinena noticed immediately. "John, what happened?" she asked gently. John sat down slowly and took a deep breath. "I received an offer for a job in another country," he said quietly. The room became silent. The opportunity could change their lives. The salary was much higher than what he earned in the town, but it also meant leaving his wife and children behind for a long time. Alinena felt her heart sink, but she forced a calm smile. "This could be good for our future," she said. John. I looked at her with guilt, "But it means leaving you alone with the kids and all the responsibilities." Alinena placed her hand on his shoulder. "We are a family. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary." A few weeks later, John left the country to start his new job. The day he left was one of the hardest days of their lives. At the bus station, their children hugged their father tightly. Alinena stood quietly, hiding the tears in her eyes. John held her hands and said, "I promise I will work hard and send money home. Just take care of yourself and the kids." Alinena nodded, but her heart felt heavy. When the bus finally disappeared down the road, she stood there silently, realizing that from this day forward she would have to face every challenge alone. The challenges came very quickly. At first, John managed to send money regularly, but after a few months, things started going wrong. The company he worked for delayed salaries. Weeks passed, then months. One evening, Alinena opened the small box where she kept their savings. There was almost nothing left. Bills were waiting to be paid. The children needed food, school supplies, and clothes. For the first time, fear entered her heart, but she looked at her children sleeping peacefully and whispered to herself, "I will not let my family fall." The next morning, before the sun even rose, Alinena made a decision that would change everything. She would find work, any work, even if it meant working day and night. She walked through the town searching for jobs. At first, many people refused. Some shops said they already had workers. Some people said she could not manage work and children at the same time, but Alinena did not give up. Finally, a small restaurant owner allowed her to wash dishes in the kitchen. The pay was very small, but she accepted immediately. Every day became a battle. She woke up before sunrise, prepared breakfast for her children, sent them to school, and then hurried to the restaurant. For hours, she stood in the hot kitchen washing dishes, cleaning tables, and carrying heavy trays. At night, she returned home exhausted, but her work did not end there. She cooked dinner, helped the children with their homework, and prepared everything for the next day. Some nights she was so tired that tears rolled down her face silently, but she never let her children see her pain. Months passed. Instead of becoming easier, life became even harder. One winter night, her youngest child became very sick. The child had a high fever and kept crying through the night. Alinena had almost no money left. She held her child in her arms, feeling helpless. For a moment she felt like the world was collapsing around her, but then she remembered something. John once told her, "You are stronger than you think." Those words gave her strength. She wrapped her child in a blanket and walked through the cold night to the nearest clinic. The doctor treated the child and said the fever would go down soon. As she walked home under the dim streetlights carrying her child in her arms, Alinena whispered quietly, "I will protect my family, no matter how hard life becomes." And at that moment, without realizing it, she had already become the true strength of the family. But the hardest days of her life were still waiting ahead. After that cold winter night, Alinena realized that life was not going to become easier anytime soon. The small job at the restaurant helped a little, but it was not enough to cover all the expenses. The rent was due every month, the children needed school supplies, and sometimes there wasn't even enough food in the kitchen. One evening, Alinena sat quietly at the small wooden table in their home. In front of her were a few coins and some crumpled bills. That was all the money she had left her daughter. Emma noticed her worried face. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked softly. Alinena forced a gentle smile. "Yes, sweetheart, everything is fine." But Emma was old enough to understand that things were not fine. That night, when the children went to sleep, Alinena looked around the quiet house and whispered to herself, "I have to do more. I cannot let my children suffer." The next day, after finishing her shift at the restaurant, she started looking for another job. She walked through the town asking every shop and small business if they needed help. Most people refused. Some said they couldn't pay much. Some said the work would be too hard for her, but Alinena had already faced too many difficulties to give up now. Finally, an elderly woman who owned a small laundry shop agreed to hire her in the evenings. The work was simple, but exhausting, washing clothes, ironing them, and folding them late into the night. Now Alinena had 2 jobs. Her days became longer than ever. She woke up before sunrise, prepared breakfast, sent Emma and Daniel to school, and rushed to the restaurant after working there for hours. She barely had time to rest before going to the laundry shop for a second job by the time she returned home at night. The streets were empty and silent. Many nights she was so tired that her hands trembled from exhaustion. But when she opened the door and saw her children sleeping peacefully, she felt strength returning to her heart. They deserve a better life, she would whisper. Months passed. The people in the town slowly began to notice Alinena's struggle. Some neighbors admired her courage, some felt sorry for her, but not everyone was kind. One afternoon at the restaurant, 2 women sitting at a table began whispering while looking at Alinena. Poor woman, one of them said. Her husband left her alone. The other woman shook her head. Maybe he will never come back. Those words felt like sharp knives in Alinena's heart, but she kept working silently, pretending she had heard nothing. That night, after returning home, she sat beside the window and looked at the dark sky. She missed John terribly. It had been many months since he left. His calls had become rare because his work situation was still unstable. Sometimes weeks passed without any news from him. But Alinena never allowed doubt to enter her heart. She believed in her husband. She believed he was doing everything he could. One evening, something unexpected happened. Emma came home from school looking very upset. Her eyes were filled with tears. What happened? Alinena asked, worried that Emma hesitated before answering. Some children at school said, Dad left us because he doesn't care anymore. Alinena felt a deep pain inside her chest. She pulled Emma into her arms and hugged her tightly. Your father loves you more than anything in this world, she said gently. He is working far away so we can have a better future. Emma wiped her tears. Will he come back? Alinena looked into her daughter's eyes and smiled softly. Yes, one day he will. But after Emma went to sleep, Alinena sat alone in the quiet room. For the first time, tears flowed freely down her face. The responsibility, the loneliness, the endless work, it was all becoming too heavy. Yet even in that painful moment, she remembered the promise she had made to herself. I will not let my family fall. So the next morning, she woke up again before sunrise. She prepared breakfast, she kissed her children goodbye, and she walked back into another long, exhausting day of work. But deep inside her heart, she hoped that somewhere far away John was also fighting his own battles, and someday he would come back home. What Alinena did not know was that an even bigger challenge was about to enter her life, one that would test her strength more than anything before. Life had already been very difficult for Alinena, but she never imagined that an even darker time was about to arrive. Every day she continued working at the restaurant and the laundry shop. Her hands had become rough from hours of washing dishes and clothes. Her back often hurt from standing all day, but she never complained. For her children, Emma and Daniel, she kept smiling. One evening as she returned home from work, she noticed Emma sitting quietly at the table with a letter in her hands. Mom, this came today, Emma said. Alinena's heart started beating faster. The letter was from John. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The words inside made the world stop for a moment. John wrote that the company he worked for had suddenly closed. Many workers lost their jobs, including him. He was trying desperately to find another job, but things were very difficult. At the end of the letter, John wrote, I'm sorry. I may not be able to send money for a while. Alinena slowly folded the letter. For a moment, she felt the room spinning around her. The small support she had been depending on was now gone. But Emma and Danielle were watching her face carefully, so Alinena forced a calm smile. Your father is strong, she said gently. He will find another job soon. The children nodded, but they could sense the worry behind her smile. That night, after everyone was asleep, Alinena sat alone with the letter in her hands. The silence of the house felt heavier than ever. She whispered softly, It's okay, John. I will take care of everything here. The next weeks became even harder. Without John's support, every expense became a burden. The landlord came one afternoon and knocked on the door. You are late with the rent, he said firmly. I will pay soon, Alinena replied politely. You said that last month, the landlord replied. Alinena lowered her eyes. Please give me a little more time. The man sighed and left, but his warning remained clear. If she could not pay the rent, they might lose their home. That night, Alinena made another painful decision. She needed a third job. Her body was already exhausted, but she knew she had no other choice. After asking around town again, she found work cleaning offices late at night. Now her schedule became almost impossible. Morning restaurant job, evening laundry shop, late night office cleaning. Sometimes she returned home. After midnight she'd barely slept for hours. Before waking up again, her neighbors began to notice how tired she looked. One old neighbor, Mrs. Parker, once said kindly, You work too much, dear. Your health will suffer. Alinena smiled softly. My family needs me. But slowly, the exhaustion started affecting her. One afternoon at the restaurant, while carrying a tray of dishes, her vision suddenly became blurry. Her legs felt weak. She realized it. The tray slipped from her hands and crashed onto the floor. The loud sound shocked everyone in the restaurant. Alinena tried to stand straight, but she felt dizzy. Her manager rushed toward her. "Alinena, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'm sorry," she said, trying to smile, but the truth was clear. She was pushing her body beyond its limits. That evening, when she returned home, Emma noticed something strange. Her mother looked pale and weak. "Mom, you should rest," Emma said, worriedly. But Alinena gently shook her head. "I can rest later." Emma looked at her with tears forming in her eyes. "You always say that." Those simple words touched Alinena's heart deeply. She sat beside Emma and held her hand. "Sometimes life becomes very hard," she said softly. "But when we love our family, we become stronger than we ever imagined." Emma hugged her tightly. "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." Alinena smiled, but inside she felt the weight of everything she was carrying. Far away, John was still struggling to find work, and here at home, Alinena was slowly sacrificing her health just to keep the family standing. Yet no matter how tired she became, one promise continued guiding her every day. She would never let her family fall, but soon, something unexpected would happen, something that would change the lives of Alinena and her children forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly turned into months. Alinena continued working harder than ever before. Her life had become a never-ending cycle of work, responsibility, and sacrifice. Early in the morning, she worked at the restaurant. In the evening, she worked at the laundry shop. Late at night, she cleaned offices. Sometimes when she walked home under the dim streetlights, the whole town was asleep. Only the sound of the cold wind and her tired footsteps filled the silent streets. Her body was growing weaker every day, but her heart refused to give up. One evening, after returning home very late, she found Emma still awake. "Mom, you're home so late again," Emma said softly. Alinena smiled and sat beside her. "You should be sleeping, sweetheart." Emma looked at her mother carefully. "You look very tired." Alinena gently touched her daughter's hair. "It's just a long day," but Emma could see the truth. Her mother's hands were shaking slightly, and her face looked pale. "Mom, you're doing too much," Emma whispered. Alinena hugged her daughter. "Everything I do is for you and your brother." At that moment, Daniel walked into the room, half asleep. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. "I'm perfectly fine," Alinena replied with a soft smile. But deep inside, she felt something was wrong. The next day at the restaurant, while washing dishes, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. Her breathing became difficult. She tried to continue working, but her vision started to blur. Then everything went dark. Alinena collapsed on the kitchen floor. The workers quickly called for help, and she was taken to the nearest clinic. When she woke up, the doctor was standing beside her bed. "You are extremely exhausted," the doctor said seriously. "You have been overworking your body for too long." Alinena slowly sat up. "I have to work," she replied quietly. The doctor shook his head. "If you continue like this, your health will become much worse." But Alinena had no choice. Resting meant losing her jobs, and losing her jobs meant losing the only income her family had. Later that evening, she returned home. Emma and Daniel ran toward her the moment she entered the house. "Mom, we heard what it happened," Emma said with tears in her eyes. The restaurant owner had already told them. Danya hugged her tightly. "Mom, please don't work so much anymore." Those words broke something inside her heart. She looked at her children and realized how worried they were. "I'm okay," she said gently. But this time, the children didn't believe her. That night, something unexpected happened. Emma quietly went into her room and took out a small box. Inside the box were her savings money she had been collecting for a long time. The next morning, she placed the box in front of her mother. "Mom, you can use this," Emma said. Alinena looked surprised. "What is this?" "It's my savings," Emma replied. "I was saving it for a bicycle, but we need it more right now." Alinena's eyes filled with tears. She pulled Emma into a tight hug. "You shouldn't have to do this, but you do everything for us," Emma said. Daniel also stepped forward. "And I'll help too. I can deliver newspapers after school." Hearing those words, Alinena realized something important. Her children had grown stronger because of her sacrifices. They had learned courage from watching their mother fight every day. But even with their help, the future still felt uncertain. For, away in another country, John was still struggling to find work. Days passed without news from him. Sometimes Alinena stood by the window at night, looking at the sky. She wondered if John was also looking at the same stars. She whispered quietly, "Come home soon. We need you." But what she didn't know was that at that very moment, John had finally received life-changing news that could bring hope back into their struggling family, and very soon, their lives were about to change forever. Weeks passed. After Alinena returned home from the clinic, even though the doctor had told her to rest, she still continued working. She simply reduced a little of the heavy work, but she refused to stop completely. Her children, Emma and Daniel, tried their best to help. Emma helped with cooking and cleaning the house. Daniel started delivering newspapers every morning before school. They were still young, but they had learned an important lesson from their mother: never give up on family. One cold evening, the three of them were sitting together at the dinner table. The meal was very simple, just bread and soup, but they were grateful for what they had. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The sound surprised them. Alinena slowly stood up and walked toward the door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing there, with tired eyes and a small bag in his hand, was John. For a moment, no one moved. Then Emma shouted with joy, "Dad!" Both children ran toward him and hugged him tightly. John dropped his bag and held them close, tears filling his eyes. "I missed you so much," he said softly. Alinena stood a few steps away, unable to speak. John looked at her, and his heart broke when he saw how thin and exhausted she looked. He walked slowly toward her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Tears rolled down Alena's face. "He came back," she said quietly. John gently held her hands. "I should have come sooner." They stood there in silence for a moment, holding each other after such a long time apart. Later that night, they all sat together and talked. John told them what had happened. After losing his job, he had struggled for many months. But, finally, he found a stable job in another company. He had saved enough money and decided that his family was more important than anything else, so he came home. But while talking to the neighbors earlier that day, John had learned something that deeply shocked him. He discovered how hard Alinena had been working. 3 jobs, sleepless nights, even collapsing from exhaustion. John looked at her with tears in his eyes. "You carried everything alone," he said. Alinena shook her head gently. "I did what any mother and wife would do." But John knew the truth. Not everyone had the strength. Shang. He stood up and looked at his children. "Your mother is the strongest person I have ever known," he said. "She saved this family." Emma and Daniel smiled proudly. They already knew that days slowly began to change, with John now working again and helping at home. Life became easier for the family. Alinena finally started resting more. For the first time in many months, she could sleep peacefully without worrying about the next day. One evening, the family was sitting outside their small house, watching the sunset. The sky was filled with beautiful orange and golden colors. John looked at Alinena and said softly, "I don't know how you did it." She smiled gently. "Love makes people stronger than they think." Emma leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you," Daniel added proudly. "You're our hero." Alinena looked at her children and felt her heart fill with warmth. All the sleepless nights, the pain and the sacrifices suddenly felt worth it, because her family was together, because her children were smiling, and because despite all the struggles, she had kept the promise she made long ago. She'd never let her family fall. And in the quiet evening light, as the family sat together, it was clear that the strongest pillar of their home had always been Alinena, the great wife who refused to give up.